Hey y'all, I'm Reese, and welcome to Making Meaning. Making Meaning is here to guide you along your path to make meaning in a way that makes sense for you by sharing examples of how other people are making meaning in their lives. This week, I am sitting down with Bill Draheim. Bill has been sailing since he was a child and now is one of the best in the game. He holds over 30 national sailing championship titles and owns his own sailmaking company, Draheim Performance Sails. Bill's experience with being a professional athlete, owning a company in that field, and being able to compete much longer than other sports might allow has allowed Bill a really interesting, specific experience in crafting his life in meaningful ways. A quick content warning before jumping into the episode: we do use one example to illustrate some points that does involve gun violence, so if that is uncomfortable to hear about, please take note. And with all of that covered, let's take a deep breath. And get started. Bill, thank you so much for agreeing to take this time to sit and talk with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you bet, Reese. Known you for quite a while, and it's fun seeing you doing adult things and creating meaning for many of us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, to get us started, first question is, what's something you're grateful for right now?
Something I'm grateful for right now. Well, probably the number one thing when a person gets to be about my age. I'm going to be 63 in a couple of months, and you hear older people talking about their health. But as you get to that point of your life, certainly there's truth to it. You see people struggling, and I think those of us that still aren't really are very grateful that they keep doing the things that we've been doing for decades. And
especially since sailing is such a physically demanding sport that you're still fully capable of doing all of that.
Right. It's my favorite passion, and if I get unhealthy, it'll have to be curbed.
Yep. Yeah. Second question, to kind of open up our conversation and see where it takes us, is what is your story? Whatever that means to you. It's a very open-ended, broad question, but how would you describe your story?
Yeah. It's interesting. There were a number of influences that kind of got me into what I do. I make sails for a living, and I race sailboats, and it's been very successful. But like many people, when I was young in school, high school, and trying to figure out what to do, I really didn't know. I mean, I was okay academically. I wasn't that motivated academically. I was doing fine. My father had a dental practice, and I just thought maybe that would be a great idea to take over his dental practice, something that was established. And
right.
I talked to him about it, and my dad didn't give me a lot of demands or even a lot of guidance. He kind of let me find my own path. But that was one point in my life where he said, "Son, I don't enjoy this, and I know you wouldn't enjoy it, and I think you should do what makes you happy in life." And a lot of us hear that. We've all heard that over time. But I kind of took it to heart. And so this was maybe when I was 16 years old. And at that point, it become clear to me that whatever my skill set was, the qualities that are necessary to become great at sailing, I had that. And that was my main passion, because that was what I was really excelling in. And I was just fortunate that along the way there were some opportunities to get involved in the sport from a business end.
Yeah.
And so that's where I went, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah. So in talking about that and that decision, you kind of talked about how you had the skill set to be able to pursue that. Where do you see the intersection of talent and skill set and passion? Do you think that talent comes from having a passion for something, or that that's an intrinsic value that then you build passion from?
No, I definitely think it's intrinsic. I mean,
Okay.
I'm a big proponent that we all have skills and we
Right.
all have abilities based on innate qualities. And whatever you're doing, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a football player, whether you're a psychiatrist or involved in sailboat racing, it's a certain set of qualities that only certain people have. And that's why I think competition is so important, because that helps bring out what those qualities are. We all can presume we want to do something because of the passion. You suggested passion, and
Right.
that's what can send us down the path. But until we run the test, be it a test academically at TCU or in chemistry, or be it running the 100-yard dash, or in my case, getting involved in sailboat races, you're not going to know. I mean, your passion's going to lead you down the path for a while, but eventually you're going to figure out whether you have the skill set for that or not. It's so important to maintain competition, because that's what brings out ability.
Interesting. So, of course, sailboat racing is rooted in competition. Like, the main way that you practice the sport when it's not just for fun is in racing. Do you think that was really instrumental in your own development and your skills as a sailboat racer?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the test. That at the end of the sailboat race, either I did well or I didn't. And if I did well, I could tell that I was good at it. So there would have been no way to decide whether or not I was going to be great at this unless we ran the races.
Right.
And we could all go out there and practice together, and we're all doing the same thing, and we're all getting better. But until you really run the race, you don't know whether you can be great at it.
Right. You have this live action comparison
Right.
that actually lets you measure up against people and see where you land.
Sure.
Do you think, because for me personally, anytime I'm in a competitive environment, I feel myself take on like a different energy and a totally different mindset when I approach things. And like, who I was when I played sports growing up is very different from, or like when we play board games, I am in a totally different competitive state. Do you feel that way about competition? And
Oh
me more about
yeah,
that.
and it's not the same exact fun feeling you have when you're laying on the couch watching the game and
Right.
drinking a beer. There's emotions, and some of the emotions are tough. I bet it's gratifying in the end. It's tough because there's stress, there's nervousness. There's all the demands that you've put on yourself to excel, and so those are, they're not always the most pleasant feelings,
Right.
but those are the ones that are going to push us through life better.
Yeah, and actually help you grow. So don't let me put words in your mouth, but competition is really a space to grow.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I
It's
love
like
that.
a stepping stone, and
Yeah.
if you avoid, I just think if you totally avoid those kind of emotions and do lay on the couch permanently, well, I mean, you know where that leads.
Yeah.
Nowhere, right?
Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. So also going back to you talking about your dad having a dental practice and him saying, you really should pursue what you enjoy. I actually feel like that's really, we like you said, we do all hear that, but I think when it comes down to what parents really want for their kids, it's actually really rare for a parent to say, go after the more financially risky option that actually is going to make you happier. So when you said that you really took that to heart, what was that like for you? Was it just a paradigm shift in the way you thought about your approach to life?
No, it really was, and partially because my dad didn't throw a lot of advice at us. There were 4 kids. He had a lot going on. He was struggling with his own stuff. I mean, he was mom and dad were obviously raising us well, but
Right.
but there wasn't that kind of intense focus. I think back in those years, there wasn't kind of the same, what do they call it now, like the soccer moms, and where the parents are really, really intensified on the children.
Right. The
But there-
helicopter kind of
Yeah,
thing.
but there wasn't that much back then. And so when he went out of his way to make some real meaningful statement to me, I thought that it was important, because he was willing to throw that at me, and I thought, well, I better take this to heart. And so yeah, it did clear the way for me to pursue something I thought wasn't so accepted. Obviously in the community I grew up, if I were to take over the dental practice, it would have been thought of as a smarter thing to do. I mean, grew up in a
traditionally,
yeah,
more
grew up in an
intellectual.
environment where there were
Right.
a lot of successful people and kind of doing the right thing so you could buy the fancy station wagon.
Yeah. So you also say that, it's the traditionally more like intellectual thing. There's a lot of successful people, but I do think success is such a personally defined thing. And obviously you chose to take this passion route instead of dental practice.
Right.
How do you define success?
Well, I mean, obviously there's got to be some sort of enough financial reward so you
Sure.
can, put a house over your head and food and all that sort
Support
of
the
thing.
family.
So unfortunately, I mean, obviously there's a minimum financial requirement, but I think it's for me the ability to set competitive goals and I also noticed when I was getting into the sport, just so much joy being out on the water away from humanity. I'm kind of a loner, so I don't like being around a lot of people a whole lot. And you get out on the water, this is a great way to avoid people, but just
Yep.
being out on the lakes or being out on open water, just so thrilling for me that the whole concept of it, being out there and the racing aspect and the fact that it's gratifying just because I'm successful, I just think it's allowed me to be a lot more at peace. It's not just the sailboat racing, and it's not just the sport, but pretty early on I was able to run my own business, and I think people that do that, regardless of the type of business, they find a lot more contentment because they're making their own decisions.
You're not really answering to anyone else.
Right, you're not answering to anyone else. It's again, it's a little more. It's like we were talking about earlier. It creates some of the stresses and anxiety because you're not sure you can pull it off, and you're not just being able to rely on a monthly paycheck.
Yeah.
But it gives you the ability to set your life in a way you want to, and
Yeah.
some of the simplest things that I can take advantage of, which brings me happiness, is instead of being committed to having to show up at a job at 8:30 in the morning because the boss requires it and the company requires it, I set my own schedule. Just being able to show up late and work late and set my own schedule is gratifying.
So obviously setting your own schedule, owning your own business provides more freedom and flexibility with your schedule. Do you think it provides, in a reverse way, constraints on the way you live your life too, that maybe a 9 to 5 might not have? Or no, do you think it's just like it just provides this whole freedom even if there are some drawbacks?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think there are some constraints because being the 9 to 5 worker, the things we just talked about maybe aren't so pleasant, but then you're able to check out at 5 and
Yeah.
you do have freedom for your own time afterwards and whatever the set vacation schedule is. But yeah, for me or for lots of people that aren't an hourly, if when the work is up, you have to be there all the time. Might be
Yep.
7 days a week, and so it's a little bit more of a roller coaster. And
Yep.
and the only way to keep the business going is to pay attention to if you do have to be there many hours.
Yeah.
So it comes and goes.
Right. Well, and also I think tying your passion into your business gets into this area where there's not as much of the work-life balance distinction. But I mean, I've always been someone who I'm like, I want my work to be my passion. I just want to be paid for getting to live my life the way I want to live it, right? Which I think is obviously like a very rare thing to be able to do. But it sounds like that's kind of your outlook as well.
It is, and even that goes back to I guess thriving on competition. When I'm in there making sales and I know I'm going up against my competition and
Right.
potentially making something for a customer that's going to beat one of my competitors.
Yeah.
Just that in itself gives me drive to do it and show up. And it's also, it's not really an art, but it's sort of an art. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a lot of eye-hand coordination, and so physically, it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Creating things.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also a feat of engineering because to make sails for sailboats, I imagine there's a lot of math that goes into that. I'm like, I don't know the first thing about it, but to create something that works with nature, but is also honing it and using it for this very specific end goal, like that takes a lot of like focus and time to craft those really intentionally to be able to do that, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's math involved with the sail itself, and then understanding how the boat's rig works, because it changes shape too. The mast changes shape depending on how you set it up. So those are fun aspects to it too, and coordinating all that with a given class rule, and it's not super complicated, but certainly some measurements that you have to pay attention to.
So another thing that you mentioned earlier that I kind of want to go back to is you said when you're out on the water and you're alone, and whether that's racing or just leisurely sailing, that you find this sense of peace. What do you think that is? Where does that peace come from?
I just think it comes from a number of things. I think much like some people, I can be a bit of a germaphobe, so staying away from people is gratifying.
Yes.
Just, someone I've never met, I don't really know how I'm going to interact with them. I don't know the setup. Just, getting gas at the gas station, that creates some caution lights, just to be careful of everyone around me.
Yeah.
And when you get out away from people that are walking around next to you, it's a bit of a relief to not have to deal with those kind of interactions.
Yeah,
so amazingly, that's a big part of it.
You're in perfect solitude.
And also just visually, most of these places where we are so impressive with beautiful homes on the shoreline. It'd be much like, I think people can equate this to either playing golf or watching a golf tournament. I mean, that's a beautiful setting to be hanging out in, and so that creates a fair bit of joy, just being in that kind of environment.
Yeah, in this kind of beautiful surrounding, how can you not just appreciate the beauty? So another question that I usually like to ask, it's inspired by a Martin Luther King Jr. quote, where he said that how we are helping other people is life's most pressing and urgent question, which I do think it's really important to help other people. But I also think that we all have some sort of pressing and urgent question that we are most likely trying to answer in our life. So one, do you have a pressing and urgent question that you think is, one that you've been asking that you really want to pursue and that you may not have an answer for, but that asking that question is really important to you?
Well, I don't know if I have a question, but for the first part of what you mentioned about Martin Luther King, as far as what was the first part of it? Educating others, helping others. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge part of life for me, and I think for a lot of people. If you become an expert in whatever you do, I think there's a tremendous amount of satisfaction in trying to teach others, and I give a lot of seminars both onshore and out on the water, coaching people. I do my own little educational video about I don't know, every couple of weeks, or certainly when I'm at a race, and the whole premise of that is to teach what we found on the water was working on that given day. And so I really only run it through Facebook. I look at Facebook, and a lot of people are taking pictures of what kind of food they're eating, or taking pictures of when they're on vacation, but I've never used it that way. I'm not really judging whether that's the way I use it or not.
Right.
But I thought, I can use this tool as a quick educator. So I call it I don't even know what I call it. I call it Draheim Performance Perspectives. But we'll try to come in at the end of the day and give a 3 or 4 minute lesson on what we thought was happening out there, and I find that very, very gratifying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What do you think it is about educating other people that is gratifying? Is it that you've worked so hard at perfecting this skill that now you also get to share it, or is there something else there?
No, I think there's something else there. Earlier we're talking about, up to this point, we're talking about how do I create meaning for myself, right? And it was most of my own conquests, but this huge amount of meaning and satisfaction when you're able to help others. Very, very, very satisfying.
In terms of, now this is a heady question, but end life goal and these things that bring you a lot of meaning, do you think that pursuing that satisfaction and joy is an end in and of itself, or is there something else that helping other people, educating other people, thriving in competition are all working towards? Is there something bigger at the end of that, or is it just these things in and of themselves are really valuable and worthwhile, or a combination of both?
No, I think that's it. I don't think there's anything bigger at the end. I don't think there's a grand prize or a grand goal. I couldn't imagine what it would be. I think, one area where it was sort of easier to have a grand goal was raising a child. We raised our son, and kind of set out through the chain of raising to try to get him to the point where we thought it should be, and it worked out great. And so there was an end goal there, and now he's off and on his own, and Mary has a great job, and so all the steps that led up to that, certainly there was an end goal. But as far as helping others in my area of expertise or continually pursuing it, I don't really know if there's an end goal. I mean, at one point in my life, I wanted to. There was not really an end goal, but there was a top goal, which was to make it to the Olympics. Our sport is one that is in the Olympics, and that would have been achieving the highest level in the sport. And I didn't quite make it, close, and I tried. And now I'm at the point in my life where I'm not physically capable anymore. So I suppose there was a competitive end goal, as you say. And now it's all sort of gravy. Yeah,
but I mean, not making it to the Olympics, but getting some world championships is not too bad of a consolation prize.
Yeah, I've had plenty of success. I'm not complaining, but that's for sure.
Yes. Okay, so then also thinking of these things in a more cosmic sense, right? That just within our life that we're living, there's not really some grand end goal. Do you see that also transferring into like the afterlife, that there's not really anything at the end? The point and purpose of meaning right now is just to make the most of these moments and helping and connecting other people? Or is there something more in that like cosmic metaphysical sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and that would extend things. And honestly, all I can say is I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I wish I did. Some people obviously have huge feelings about this, committed to a strong yes or a strong no, but I don't know if I've seen the right signals for anything out there.
Yeah. So when you say you just don't know, do you feel like you fall more in the, if there is, cool, but I haven't seen anything. If there's not, cool, I'm fine. Or do you feel like you fall more, I don't really believe in something bigger, but if I'm proven wrong, that's okay?
Yeah, I guess it could be something like that.
Okay.
And if we're talking, religion, and especially a lot of the Christianity morals, I think, if they're following, what we call the golden rule,
right.
You do unto others as they would do unto you. I think those are fantastic guidelines for society. So I certainly don't have any issues with that. I think it's a wonderful way, and I think certain people need certain sort of motivations to maintain in society.
Yeah.
Some do, some don't, and don't need the motivations, and some just refuse to be part of it. And it's tricky. It's hard. It's hard to figure out why some people just happily get a gun and blow someone away when they're 15 years old and spend the rest of their life in jail. It's I don't understand it, but it's hard to keep everybody on track.
Yeah. So religion can certainly serve, because I always view religion and spirituality as separate things, and you can be a religious person, a spiritual person, or both a religious and spiritual person, or neither. But that religion is more of these guidelines, right, of how you live your life, of values, of actual actions you take, whereas spirituality is like just the connection that you feel to something bigger than yourself, and that's kind of the distinction there. But I think a lot of people, specifically religious people, that do have these guidelines and rules, sounds so stringent, but rules for how to live a meaningful, ethical life. You know, not everyone believes this. I don't want to overgeneralize, but a lot of religious people think that that's necessary to, you know, keeping on the straight and narrow, encouraging values and ethics. And obviously you're not a devout religious person. What would you say to that in terms of someone who doesn't necessarily practice that, but still holds values and ethics?
Yeah, I think for people that think it through and end up doing correct things, especially as it relates to, you know, like I said, the golden rule, I think they're just making smart, almost what I want to call risk-reward decisions, you know, and they're thinking it through. And someone who says, you know, if I could potentially take this gun out and blow away my neighbor and take all his stuff without any risk, maybe I'd do it. But if you're somewhat, you know, thoughtful about that, you'd say the risk is I spend the rest of my life in jail, and I don't want to do that. So I think people are making honest risk-reward decisions about how they treat others.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think that helps us to make the correct decision, because you wouldn't want, you know, negativity you spread to someone else to come back at you from them if you thought it all the way through. And I think that's where people get off track, is they don't quite think it all the way through.
Got it. So you don't necessarily need to have these guidelines.
No, but I do think you need personally to understand what's the full ramification of what I'm going to be doing next.
Yeah. So obviously in the example you use, the ramification there would be jail, right? Yeah. Life in prison, whatever. But, well, not whatever, but depending on the state that you're in, the extent of the punishment, blah, blah, blah. Do you think there are other ramifications besides, so obviously that's like a physical consequence that comes when you break a severe law. And of course there would also be social ramifications where even if you weren't put in jail, but someone learned that you had murdered someone, you would probably lose your friends, lose your family, like you would probably be a social outcast. There'd be consequences there. Besides those risks or those potential consequences, do you think there's anything else internal that keeps people from hurting others, making bad decisions, besides the external factors and consequences?
No, I do. And I think the great examples are when you watch children grow up in the same family, the exact same social environment, the exact same family structure, and probably the exact same rules.
Right.
And the kids all act differently. Some are easy to deal with, some are hard to deal with, some you can't even keep control of. So yeah, I think a lot of it is innate, more so than social structure.
Yeah, so you also have those innate things. Where do you think the innate comes from? Is it a genetic thing, or is there something else at play? Which again, I don't think has to necessarily imply a designer or a god or anything like that. But is there something else a little bit more non-physical?
Well, it could be. Yeah, I know I know you're spiritual, and there could be some guiding light that we don't understand. I mean, I'd like to think it's genetic. I'm just not that spiritual, but I have no idea. But it is interesting that people end up so different with such similar, genetic makeups.
Yeah, but we are, like you were saying, I do think a lot of it is impacted by genetics. We're seeing more and more all of these studies that show how mental illness, for example, you can trace back through ancestry. And there was a study done on children that were adopted from Russian families. And there was this huge mass adoption into Dallas like 20 years ago of like 50 Russian kids. And almost all of these Russian kids had horrible behavioral problems. A lot of them had mental health issues and just really poor social skills on the whole. Well, the parents who adopted all of these kids started doing research, and they're like, why do we all have the same experience? Because they were adopted into good families. Turns out most of these kids were from a Russian mafia that everyone had been either murdered or gave up their kids so that they would have a better life. And they were babies when they were adopted. There was no reason that they were exposed to violence or anything like that. And yet, the genetics of potentially being related to people that are attracted to a violent lifestyle can still come through there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I
Yeah.
just wrote a sailing article, and it's sort of along the same lines. Yeah, that's why I think DNA has a lot to do with it. A little bit different angle, but
Sure.
Psychological test. They put all these kids in a room, and with one piece of candy, and they would tell the kids if they could sit there and wait for some extended period of time, they would get a second piece. Well, some of the kids couldn't handle it, and they just went ahead and ate the piece of candy that was there, and some waited. Instant gratification versus delayed gratification.
Right.
Then they tracked these kids later in life, and the kids that waited were far more successful.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not, maybe if you're 5 and you have some parenting or, rules or guidance at that point that says, delayed gratification is something that we care about and that's subliminal. Or maybe the kids that are taught something, like there's some sort of correlation with other lessons their parents teach them or something. But even then, that seems like a pretty inherent drive to either wait or to eat the candy.
Yeah, you could almost relate it to the Russian mafia group where whatever they're going to make happen, they're going to make it happen right now with it's a gun or whatever, and not thinking about how that translates to long term.
Yeah, and what those long-term consequences and risks really are too. So thinking about this risk-reward kind of system that you were saying you believe in, do you think that this kind of genetic question, and obviously we're talking a little bit with like nature and nurture, but that impacts the way people approach that too, that genetically some people are more predisposed to make higher risks and some people are much more risk averse, and that is part of our kind of genetic inherent makeup?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and it could be the risk or gratification, but yeah, I think people make decisions on their internal makeup for sure.
Yeah. So then thinking about how you've chosen to live your life pursuing this thing you're very passionate about, but also you have the skills and the talents that match up with that. Did you view that as a risky decision or as just this is the right decision? And if so, do you think you're someone who is risk averse or takes a little bit more risk?
I'm not quite sure about the last part of the question, but yeah, the fact that I knew that I was really good at what I was doing, I could look at it and probably see that I could be successful down the road.
A little bit less risk.
A lot of people jump into things, or they buy a business, they don't know anything about it, and then 8 months later they're out of business. But I could see that with my abilities, it would be something that would probably sustain.
Right. And there's a certain amount of risk in everything, right?
Yeah,
but
of course.
That was something that you would be more capable of than your average Joe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think I would have been successful trying to, open a golf store. I don't know anything about golf. I couldn't interact with the customers. So
Yeah.
sort of have to take some cues from ability.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And listening to yourself and, what you really can and can't do. Yeah. So are you ever doing things intentionally with the purpose of this is going to be a meaningful experience? Or do you find that you're drawn to do things and then you take meaning from it?
Yeah, I mean, on a daily basis, I don't know if it's if the drive of finding meaning is quite there. I think it's just kind of the raw understanding of getting work done that needs to be done and being motivated to. Well, obviously, you're satisfying people when you do that.
Yeah.
People are, counting on you to trade money for product or something along those lines, and you better feel an obligation to make a commitment to, we can call it a contract, whether there's money involved or a verbal contract, and so they're going to be obviously satisfied if I come through, and it's not going to be pleasant if I don't. So I guess I am trying to, respond to people's desires.
Yeah.
Make them happy. That's going to make them happy for sure. If they want a new sale, I'm going to give them one.
Interesting. So, and then of course you obviously have a desire to make them happy. So it's almost like your desire is just responding to someone else's desire. Do you think that's a big part of our kind of societal makeup, that we are just responding to each other's desires and wants and needs?
Yeah, it almost goes back to that golden rule. Do unto others you want them to do unto you. And I think that's super important.
Do you think that our desire to help other people or meet other people's desires comes from a personal sense of gratification, or that it can be actually just to help other people? For instance, Draheim Performance Perspectives, the videos you post, do you think that, I guess I'm really just asking about altruism, do you think that those things that you're posting are genuinely solely just to provide information for other people, or is our drive to meet other people's desires selfishly motivated?
I think it's both. I think again, it's this like we were just talking about, the circular interaction of each person helping each other. Then they help you, and obviously there's more to it than just handing out information. It gets my name out there, and people become familiar and potentially work more with me. Yeah, so it's
rewards from doing that.
It's kind of circular.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to, the rules we set for ourselves in our life, is that, going back to the religion question of values and ethics and golden rule, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who would say that the golden rule has any undesired effects, because I think generally that's a pretty safe one. But there are so many rules, especially in religion, that have been used for horrible harm and hurt.
Right.
Wow, all my wheels are turning. Okay, so final two questions. One, is there anything else that you want to make sure we touch on, either because of something we talked about that you're like, I want to make sure I throw this out there too, or a resource that you want to throw out there, or just something that we didn't even talk about at all but you want to say?
Oh, maybe a couple quick things. I mean, one thing that always drives me is and I always did this with my son, is have him watch, they're largely athletic inspirational movies, but I think you can just get so inspired when you watch the underdog prosper. Probably my favorite movie to watch is Miracle, when the 1980 Olympic team, a bunch of college kids beat up on the best team in the world, the Russians, and the whole story is fascinating. It just showed how digging real deep you can probably accomplish more than you think you can accomplish. So I always suggest people try to find inspiration out of movies if they can, and I'm not a big fan of fiction, but like stuff that really happened can be inspiring.
Yeah.
And then I saw a clip that was really interesting statement recently, and it was an interview. I think this woman was brought in for like a corporate rah-rah type thing. Mm-hmm. She was a college basketball coach, and it was a clip of her talking about her players, and she was saying, look, life never gets easier. We always talk about how, a couple years into this job it'll be easy, or when I'm a sophomore, I'll know the plays and it'll be a lot easier. Like,
right.
No, it never gets easy. You always, when you accomplish a task, it's on to another task that's more difficult. All that happens through life is you do a better job of handling difficult, because to excel, you have to keep handling difficult, and you have to create new difficult. So if someone's just waiting for the easy street, they're not going to thrive.
Yeah. I love that. It's just new difficult, because there's also something in that honors what you've overcome, right? That it's like you've done this before. You've faced difficult and succeeded, but now we're looking forward. What's the next difficult? It's not going to be any easier, but you can do it again and you can grow.
Right.
I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing those. And I agree. Miracle is a fabulous movie. And there's so many inspirational movies and TV shows and books and things out there that just serve as a really great reminder to keep pushing and find that inspiration. Okay. Final question. What is one word that you would use right now to describe how you're feeling? Just in the moment, and it doesn't have to be a fancy word or anything, but one word.
That I'm feeling right now, here on this couch with you.
Yes.
Satisfaction.
I love it.
I think it was, good interview and hopefully some insight. And that was a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely was a lot of insight, and I'm really excited to put this one out there, see reactions, and I appreciate your time and energy and generosity of doing this with me. I really, really appreciate it.
Sure, Reese, and I think this is great. I mean, we're always trying to push people's buttons to help others be happy and succeed.
Right.
So you're doing a great thing.
Thank you. Most urgent question: how can we help other people? So I appreciate it. Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
Thank you all so much for listening today. In the episode, I bring up a study about Russian adopted children that my therapist told me about, and while I cannot find the specific study, I am linking a very similar one in the blog post that is associated with this episode on the website. Bill also brought up a psychological study, and the one he's talking about is the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. There is tons of information on this experiment out there if you simply give it a quick Google. At the end of the episode, Bill also discusses the movie Miracle, and you can watch this with a Disney Plus subscription, or you can rent it for $3.99 on YouTube or Apple TV. A big thank you to Podington Bear for making Meaning's theme music. If you want more info about today's episode, head to thecoherecollective.com and click on blog. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you can subscribe to our newsletter on thecoherecollective.com so you never miss another episode. For updates on all of our stuff, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at The Cohere Collective, and you can follow me on Instagram at Lillian Reese Brown. If you feel so inclined, feel free to leave an honest review or rating. This helps me reach the people who will resonate with my content and hopefully reach my goal of making the world a better place. Right now, I am feeling renewed. I was a little sleepy this morning, and even though it's so incredibly lucky that I get to live the life that I do, it's really easy to lose sight of that gratitude sometimes. And so revisiting this episode and recording the intro and outro for it really does serve as a good reminder to be thankful. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really do appreciate it. And I hope you feel like you are living more coherently. I'll catch y'all next time. Love.